Based on the data given here, we will create a pivot table. Let's go to Insert Pivot Table. If you look at the setting, the default data will come from A1 to E19. A1 is here, E19 is here. So by default, all the data has been selected to create the pivot table. It is what we want, so we will keep that default. And then for the location of the pivot table, we have two choices. We can put the pivot table in a new worksheet. We can also put it on the existing worksheet. I prefer to put it on the existing worksheet next to the original data. So the data and pivot table, they will be side by side. Location, I will choose the location here and then click on OK. We can set up the pivot table. For the table will be based on the 5 items. The 5 items, they are the 5 columns. In the original data, we have vendor name, purchasing agent, date, year, and amount. It shows how much money was spent by the agent on the vendor in the year on that specific date. That's the purchasing amount made by the agent. So this agent purchased this much from this vendor on this date. For the pivot table, we need to decide on the columns, on the rows, and also on the value. Columns and rows, the items under columns and rows, we call them dimensions. In the homework, we need to create a 3-dimension pivot table. Under columns and rows altogether, we have to have 3 items. I will put 1 item under columns. I will put 1 item under rows. To add the 3rd item, if you look at the items left, year will be a good choice. The year will give you the time dimension. I want to put year under column. If you want, you can also put year under rows. You can move things around. And this item, I will remove it. Now we have the dimensions set up. So 3-dimension pivot table. 1, 2, 3. 3 dimensions. 1 item under columns, 2 items under rows. We need numbers in the middle. That's the value we are interested in. In this case, we are interested in the purchasing amount. So I will just drag the purchasing amount under values. Now we have the 3 dimensions, and this part we call that measure. So this pivot table, we have 3 dimensions and we have the measure. The 3 dimensions, they are vendor name, purchasing agent, and year. The measure is the purchasing amount. The default is sum of amount. The default is sum of amount, but there are other choices we can choose from. Click on Value Field Settings. The default is sum. You can use average, max, min. We will keep the default setting. Now let's look at the information created by the table. we need to write down 3 questions can be answered by the pivot table. One example can be how much was purchased from Ace Holdings. Ace Holdings will be this vendor, and how much was purchased. We will look at the total. That's grand total here, the total from this vendor. So you can write down the answer 24632. That is the number rounded up from this value here. So your question need to be answered directly by your pivot table. You have a question here, and then the answer will come directly from your table. You don't need to do any other calculations. Here's one example. For the homework, you need 2 more other questions. You can think about this column, that's the grand total. You can think about this column, that's the purchase amount made by each agent. You can think about the numbers in the middle. For example, this number will be the purchase amount made by Adam Smith from Ace Holdings in the year of 2006. So just come up with 2 additional questions and their corresponding answers. The answers, they have to come directly from your table.